If in a few years' time we're relating the milestones that America took on the way to full-on authoritarianism, it seems quite likely that the current disturbances and military mobilization in Los Angeles would be one of them. Having initially broken previous norms by mobilizing 2,000 National Guard troops against the wishes of a state governor, this has been followed since with the doubling of that number to 4,000 and then adding 700 US Marines in as well. It's hard to overstate just how much the different halves of polarized America are watching very different movies at this point. And it needs to be said because it's tempting to assume everyone is seeing the same events as you are, which can make it bewildering when you find perceptions to be sharply at odds in the future. In other words, it becomes an uncompromising moment of confrontation which both sides imbue with what seems to them to be intuitively right and overwhelming moral clarity. So, let's start with how this is playing out on the Trump side, the movie they're watching. And there's no accident there, because this is the story that the Trump administration set out to tell. To all appearances, they jumped on this opportunity precisely because this was the moment that would enable them to do it. The focus, as you would expect, has been on the violence, the burning cars, the rioters, the looters. The impression given that this is massively representative of the protests and of large enough scale to be completely out of control and needing the Trump intervention. There are individual stories about people who attacked a federal officer, a man being dramatically taken down and so on, snippets from the action in progress. And California Governor Gavin Newsom's political ambitions practically non-existent, they say, as LA devolves into riots, social media critics predict. Ah yes, those social media critics, always such reliable bellwethers of political fortunes. The story is one of criminal immigrants wielding flags, throwing bricks and incendiaries at the police, and hapless Democrats at best, and culpable collaborators at worst, who let it happen. Indeed, to the degree where Trump had said to reporters that he would happily see Gavin Newsom, the governor, arrested if his border czar Tom Homan wanted to do it. "I would do it if I were Tom. I think it's great," he said. Homan fanned the flames by saying that he hadn't ruled out the possibility, which provoked Newsom to respond, "He knows where to find me." Homan then later dialed it back, saying that there were no grounds to do so this time. Meanwhile, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said that Los Angeles called itself a city of immigrants.
Well, they're not a city of immigrants, they're a city of criminals.
This is key, of course. The protests and riots are in response to heavy-handed operations to track down illegal immigrants. The more you can dehumanize those people, the more you call them criminals and lowlifes, you associate the people grabbed by ICE as being representative of the people who are now hurling bricks in the street, the more powerful that is for your wider consistency, because they're quite happy to have those people rounded up. So, a city of criminals. DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin told Fox News on Monday that the immigrants who had been picked up by ICE were, quote, "the worst of the worst," implying that, in line with what Trump had said would happen, they had been going after those with criminal records first. But the criminal immigrants and the rioters weren't a disconnected force, according to the administration. So the Homeland Security Twitter account posted this: "California politicians must call off their rioting mob." So not even that those politicians are hapless in the face of a mob, but instead they are now willing collaborators. Indeed, they're in charge. Stephen Miller reinforced the message with numerous social media posts, for example this one. "The political leaders of California and Los Angeles are siding with the insurrectionist mobs fighting to dissolve America over the heroes of ICE fighting to save America." You can see where this one goes. The political opposition are leading an insurrection. Clearly, therefore, they should be imprisoned, just like many of the MAGA commentators below Miller's tweet were demanding. That's not to say that Los Angeles' history of problems, social problems and crime and all the rest of it, doesn't support the less mad part of the critique. Even Democrats like Ezra Klein often acknowledge that the problems in Democrat-run cities are one of the biggest factors that have lost them support in recent years. So, of course, it's then easy to take that which is widely acknowledged and build on it like crazy. Let's face it, the propaganda processes being brought to bear on this doesn't require much in the way of an anchor in actual reality. Those are just the relatively sane takes as well. Of course, there's a viral suite of conspiracy theorist editions feeding the Trumpian base via social media, like the photo of building materials from Malaysia, actually, if you bother to check, which perennially appears online with the suggestion that they were placed by the authorities close at hand to provide ammunition for the rioters to throw at the police. Oh, and of course, George Soros was involved somehow, because of course he was. It's only a subset of people that mine those depths, but they are real and it's a subset that does matter. The Wall Street Journal editorial board gave voice to the strategic end of a non-crazy part of this perspective. It said that Democrats had played into the administration's hand by attacking Trump for intervening, while failing, in their view, to respond appropriately as activists torched cars, looted businesses, and occupied a major freeway. California Governor Gavin Newsom's response on Monday? Sue Mr. Trump over his Saturday order deploying the California National Guard to Los Angeles to protect federal property and officers. The governor claimed that calling in troops was inflammatory, but recent history suggests that protesters don't need a provocation to turn violent. And that is the movie that one part of the country is watching. It's very compelling. No discussion to be had whatsoever about things like overreach of presidential authority or discussion of state sovereignty. If, when we look back, we see this as a milestone in that slide to full-on authoritarianism, that will be significant. The lack of attention to important guardrails, purely focusing instead on provocations painted in the most inflammatory way. Now, the movie being seen on the other side is rather different. There is little discussion of the actions of the rioters, although figures from Gavin Newsom to Bernie Sanders sought to counsel protesters that using violence would play into the administration's hands. There is some focus on some of the immigrants who were taken by ICE raids, many of whom had been in the US for decades, had frantic families trying to trace them, and apparently some of whom have already been deported. So while the other side were focusing on some of the ones they found that were criminals, this will focus on the innocent ones. Despite Tricia McLaughlin's worst of the worst jibe, it turns out that many of the 200 people seized had no criminal records whatsoever, and it was purely about their immigration status. Others are sharing video clips of police overreach, for example, the shooting with a rubber bullet of an Australian reporter, apparently deliberately by one of the police behind her, as she was just finishing talking to camera. Others downplayed the violence altogether that had taken place. Hillary Clinton, for instance, tweeting that Newsom hadn't requested the National Guard be deployed, quote, following peaceful demonstrations. The suggestion being that all the violence only happened because of Trump causing the chaos, which was not quite in sync with the actual timeline of events and was certainly picked up big time by the other side, as you can imagine. But of course, the main focus was on the extraordinary norm breaking by the administration. Violent protests and even riots are not unheard of in the United States after all, and never before has this sort of response been the result. Gavin Newsom said that there had been no unmet need for federal help and that sending in National Guard forces by the Trump administration was looking to escalate tensions to feed exactly the narrative that they have been telling. The Financial Times editorialized that the actions constituted a warning to other Democrat-run states that they could face similar treatment if they try to block deportations. Writing in The Atlantic, David Frum went several stages further than that, suggesting that this was the start of a plan that takes the US to the logical endpoint of the Trump Project 2025 experiment. He said that the episode fits a much feared sequence of events. Step 1. Use federal powers in ways to provoke some kind of made-for-TV disturbance. Flames, smoke, loud noises, waving of foreign flags. Step 2. Invoke the disturbance to declare a state of emergency and deploy federal troops. Step 3. Seize control of local operations of government. Policing in June 2025. Voting in November 2026. Now, this could be catastrophizing, but the attempts to link Democrat political leaders with the rioters to suggest that they're directly involved in protecting criminality, they're directly involved in stoking the riots, you can see how it's not many notches of the dial from there to claiming an emergency because Democrats are supposedly threatening an election. Maybe voting then gets suspended until order is restored. But there's always so many more conspirators lurking, so that date gets pushed back and back. When elections finally happen, well, all those safety measures the government put in place, if you squint at them in the half-light, they kind of look a little bit like government control of the voting process. Maybe they can't achieve that in the short time they have, but they at least managed to prosecute the most effective opposition leaders, to take them off the playing field. The language of a Trump team supports that reading of events. The demonization of protests as being insurrection, the smearing of Democrat leaders as being weak initially, but increasingly being framed as malevolent and complicit. I mean, take this additional exchange with Stephen Miller again, quote tweeting a clip of LA Mayor Karen Bass saying, "We need to stop the raids. This was chaos that was started by Washington, D.C." Miller then laid out the playbook with total clarity in response. The threat being made here by Mayor Bass is explicit. The mayor of LA is effectively saying the mob violence is caused by the mere presence of ICE in the city, and the violence against ICE will not stop unless federal law enforcement is withdrawn from the city. This is the definition of insurrection. LA and CA leadership demand the right to illegally import unlimited foreigners into America, to control America's entire immigration policy by fiat, and if they are so permitted, they will allow mobs to target ICE with impunity. Which, of course, is not quite what she said, but it's the bit he finishes with that is the far-reaching bit. Los Angeles and California are demanding the nullification of the election results, of federal law, of national sovereignty, and of the bedrock constitutional command of one national government. That phrase, right there, our opponents are acting to nullify election results. Words similar to that are going to be the ones that justify whatever it is they try to do to the election processes in the future. If Miller had just been focused on the immediate issue, he might have said something like, ICE are allowed to carry out raids, the state has to protect them in carrying out their jobs. And California would have had no choice except say something like, well, tell us you're coming next time, which they didn't do this time, so we can be ready for it. I mean, regardless of their preferences, that would be the default place you retreat to, because it's what the law supports. And even if everyone retreats to their corner grumbling, that's what happens. But of course, what Miller has been saying makes it perfectly clear that the nature of this exercise was to provoke exactly this confrontation, to start the process of planting this narrative in the public discourse that is about the use of military force internally being necessary, of political opponents engaged in leading insurrections, overthrowing election results. You can see where the logic of that narrative takes you. And if the LA operation is a test to see if such narratives would be more powerful for their base than any concerns they might have about broken guardrails, you can look at Fox News and even to the Wall Street Journal and see that the signs are relatively encouraging. For them, I mean. An Associated Press NORC Centre for Public Affairs Research poll in April found that half the country believe Trump's deportations have gone too far. The other half thought they were about right or hadn't gone far enough. You can map those two halves very easily to the two different movies that are playing out across the United States for these events. If what we're seeing right now is one half of that split, rehearsing, taking control of the levers of power in ways that de facto end the US democratic tradition, you either have an authoritarian coup or you have civil war, and maybe both, first for one and then the other. The only other alternative that I can think of is that they fail. They fail to do the short-term measures they would need to take. They lose heavily then in the midterm elections, which go ahead in robust enough form to deliver that result. To get that outcome, it would be advantageous to have less rioting on the streets, more smart resistance in peaceful demonstrations in the courts, in Congress, and to start building now the infrastructure of people to monitor what is being done in that election process. Because if people are going to protect the process from supposed insurrectionist opponents, they shouldn't be allowed to do so out of sight. Right now, there is still a healthy majority in the country who would revert strongly to the principle that elections should be fair. Now, you can change that in a country over a decade, maybe. Not in a year, however much performative theatre you provoke for the benefit of the television cameras and the social media clips. I think, assuming this operation is exactly what it looks like, it is, as David Frum suggested in The Atlantic, a dry run. One of the first of several that will help to plant the seeds and water the seeds of the narrative that will start the job of weeding out those with scruples from the ranks of the forces that need to be deployed, and probably the ranks of the president's own cabinet and other top team members as well, because some of them surely won't go along with it. All getting ready for the main event. There is still time for all this to come to grief, for ill discipline and incompetence in the White House to derail whatever it is that they have planned. But it's as well to note, seriously, what playbook these events come from, and not to be surprised when one step leads to another.